You know what I tried to ask you a second ago was, did Lily go to any other labels besides Slash, or was Slash and Ace of, well, we know about Ace of Hearts, but were those the only two labels on the in play at that point, or were there other labels?
No, I mean she was really really prudent as a manager, so she knew enough, excuse me, not to uh, you know, leave other options unopened.
Hmm.
But I think she had cultivated a mindset among the band members that it was like, it's got to be Slash. And, so that was just the feeling like that was the place for us to be. Los Lobos had gotten signed by that time. I can't remember if the Violent Femmes, I think the Violent Femmes had, and it was just, it,
83, I think that first record came out. Yeah,
yeah, so it a Dream Syndicate, it was, it
great
wasn't
label.
looking less interesting, it was looking more interesting. So no doubt Lily she knew how to make connections, and she did it in an authentic way. Um, but we were all we were all partying down pretty hard, and um, that was just part of it. That was part of it, like of the after Steev left the band, you have your four Del Fuegos, and three of them are in long-term recovery. So
Oh,
we were hitting it hard, and it led to, not some of the best decisions being made. Um, we remained a band for three records, and then they made a fourth after
right.
I left and Woody left. But you look back and you go, what might the possibilities have been without drugs and alcohol? Because there were many good forces at work,
Hmm.
despite all that. And I'm not going to tell a saccharine story either. Sometimes, excuse me, sometimes the drugs and alcohol lead to positive things too, like a certain energy. But ultimately, drugs and alcohol would win. They'll kill you, even if at times they create certain energies. It's complicated, but
Yeah.
there's no question that we were getting down in the dirt.
I'm going to ask you one other question about that period, and then we can move on. I don't know if you remember this, but I saw you guys at Club Lingerie in Hollywood. I think it was 984. It wasn't a huge crowd, but it was who was in the room was amazing. David Lee Roth, Joe Strummer, and Paul Westerberg were all in the room at that show. Do you remember that?
I mean, I remember the Club Lingerie shows, because I was talking to my girlfriend about this. Like when we came into LA, one of the very first people we met, who we just didn't know anything about, came to our where we were rehearsing, and it was Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and it was just like this. Who's this kid with the Jimi Hendrix tattoo? Like he just seemed like he wasn't East Coast. He was decidedly West Coast. But it's like, oh, people in this underground scene, people know about us before we've arrived. And we were all, I don't know my LA neighborhoods. I can't even tell you where we were living. I think it was Berendo was the street.
Was it
But
the
the four of us,
Oakville, or whatever that place is called, the house where all the
no,
bands used to
no,
play?
I know,
Stay?
I know what you're talking about, but
It wasn't that
Tom
place.
and Woody stayed there at some point. But this was a floor in a house in a
Okay.
neighborhood. And we'd have parties where it was like, Peter Case from the Plimsolls and John and Exene from X. I remember Dennis Duck from the Dream Syndicate sleeping in our bathtub. Uh, the plugs were there. It was like everybody was there. It's like it was a fairly small community. Kid Congo from the Cramps and the
That's
Gun Club,
cool.
like all these people who had listened to their records, and they're I think we were everybody else had slightly more respectable lives. We were like, the rock and roll equivalent of an underground frat house. And so everybody came and made a mess of themselves at our place. But you came into something that was almost like waiting for you. And again, I think Lily Dennison made that possible in conjunction with Slash Records. So those Club Lingerie shows were the early ones in particular, like these kind of welcome to town things. And you came to understand that the underground was if it was a bubble, it was a porous bubble. So someone like David Lee Roth could step into that world because they'd come out of clubs at some point, different ones. The people knew, like generally when things start, they start in places like this. So let's go check it out. And it was it was shocking.
I'll never
And
forget that night because I met all three of those people that night because there weren't a lot of people there. And I was working at Enigma Records, so I obviously knew about the Del Fuegos and everyone was talking about you guys. So I had to go. But then when I end up having a conversation with Joe Strummer, I mean, I never expected that would ever happen, you know?
yeah, well, it was like I was saying about Robert Plant and Sam Phillips. Like, I think this is partially pre-internet, because when information spread, people were a little more discerning in where they got their information from. But there were various, almost like connector
Yeah.
figures. I remember when we played Maxwell's in Hoboken and we went and visited Ira before Yo La Tengo. And it was like he was one of those kind of guys. However unassuming, we were being welcomed. That conversation tied with, Peter Jesperson in Minneapolis. And there was this network that I think had some particular strengths because it was a pre-internet world.
Yeah.
When people made those connections, I think they tended to them. They fed and watered them more. And so, we come out to LA, we're playing Club Lingerie. It's like, yeah, people had talked about us, and there they were welcoming us. And we were discovering things like, what's this taste in the burrito? Oh, it's cilantro. Like we're not the most worldly cats.
Uh,
So we're finding, new ways to get high, new food. I'd never seen a palm tree. And there's David Lee Roth and Joe Strummer. And it's like, yeah, like what a time.
Dude, I can relate because I moved to LA at the end of '83 and I'm from New England too. So when I got there, I didn't know what cilantro was either. So
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
really cool. Just to wrap up the Del Fuegos here, I mean, is there there's no other way to ask you, why did you leave? I mean, did you just
Yeah.
have a,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty much an open book on anything, but I joined when I was 17, and I'm still processing this, whether in therapy or in the conversation I had with my girlfriend at dinner last night. Um, but I joined my brother's band, and it was definitely his. But in the process, I came to maybe believe in myself a little bit, despite all the insecurity and all the fear. I think I got a sense of I have more to contribute. And the
Mhm.
space that I was given in the band was very limited. I looked like a bigger part of it on stage than I really was. and I wanted more because I felt like I had more to offer. And but I didn't have a way of talking about it. I was just angry.
Did you go to
And
college right after that?
it took a little bit. It took a little bit. But it wasn't long. But I think that band could have, if we had more first maturity and two, fewer drinks, and three, maybe a capacity to be helped in communicating, we could have become a band that had more space for the creative potential in someone like me.
Right.
But if I'm just coming to my brother with anger, like what's he going to do? He's going to get defensive. A wall's going to go up. That's what happened. You know,
Well,
dysfunction.
yeah, it's really weird on your Wikipedia page because I just glanced at it. It said you guys had a fractious relationship, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's classic band stuff. I mean, we didn't invent rock and roll dysfunction. It's a
Right.
grand tradition. Uh, but there's, you know, it's not a sadness that's going to keep me from living my day fully today, but there is a sadness like what could the Del Fuegos have been? There could have been a different fourth record and maybe a fifth and sixth, but we didn't have the tools to figure out how to bring me in a little bit deeper. And I didn't have the tools of like how to say it. I
It's
and so
interesting.
I jumped ship, and it was a super hard time in my life. I bought an 8-track Atari half-inch recorder and basically went to a bedroom in my mother's house and learned how to turn songs into recordings in a very primitive way, and I got somewhere. And I only played that stuff. I got help from some Boston people. The guys who had been in that group face to face, Angelo Petraglia, who went
Yeah.
and did Kings of Leon later on, uh, Billy Beard, who's in Session Americana, Stu Kimball, like these guys were like, oh, he does have something. Angelo ended up producing my first solo record years later. Um, but I was hell bent, and then one of the people I played my recordings for was T-Bone Walk, who was um, staff producer at CBS at that time, and in Hall and Oates in the SNL band, and he called my mother's house like in the middle of the night saying, "Where is he?" And it was like, "I'm going to get a CBS deal." He was like, "I'm going to get you one," and then I stopped doing anything. I'm like, he's going to take care of it, that's not how careers are made. Careers are made by someone who's like ambitious and unyielding in work. And it wasn't going to happen for me. And in retrospect, I see my part in the dysfunction of the Del Fuegos, and I see my part in the failure to launch a solo career at that time. But I feel like the gods were looking down and they had a plan, and that was let's get this guy to school. That's what he needs some classes, and that's where he's going to become the person he doesn't know he wants to become, but who he really does want to become.
It's great when you can look at yourself in the third person like that and see everything that clearly. Um, Memory Girls was a pretty great record. I mean, I know a few people. Patty Griffin, I worked with her at A&M. I know she was on. You mentioned Billy Beard, Emmylou Harris,
Yeah.
Billy Conway. How did those collaborations come about, and why did they? What did they bring to the record? Bring to the table for you? Because that's a really good
Well,
record. Not my favorite,
well,
by the way. My favorite song is I'll Never Forget That Day with You.
that one's from
Later.
my
That's later.
Yeah, that one's from my fourth.
Yeah.
So I've done a number of solo recordings, but it just other things started happening in life. So that part of my life is the least visible. But I listen to those. I stand by every one of those. And sometimes I think, though I'm not known for this, I think my greatest strength might be songwriting. Uh, I really believe in what I can do there. And that's why I say, like, I would have loved to have seen Adele Fuegos where that was folded in. But anyway, to your question, Patty was working with Angelo, and she was also a Boston artist. So she was kind of a natural to bring in. And there are a few who sing like Patty sings. And
She's
she's
awesome.
also just an unbelievable writer across the board. She's a force. And Daniel Tashin was playing on that record. Daniel got record of the year for Casey Musgrave's Golden Hour record, but he's an unbelievable talent too. And he grew up with his dad, this is another Boston story. His dad comes from the Remains,
Wow.
Barry Tashin, and then Barry was in Emmy Lou's hot band. And Daniel asked Emmy Lou to come in. Emmy Lou loved Patty, so she came and sang on my record. Jerry Dale McFadden from the Mavericks came in and played. There are a bunch of people, and
Yeah, I only wrote a
it was
few names down, but
it was an incredible moment for me because the guy who was never recognized as a songwriter had all these heavy people saying, "We like this stuff," and I, I would say like I wept a lot in that period because some part of me that was really hurting because I felt like I could do something that I hadn't gotten a chance to do in this band that I was in that I really wanted to do. I was
hmm.
getting that record mattered more for me, not in terms of what the record did in the world, but what it did internally for me. It said, there's got to be one judge of your work, and it has to be you. It can't be your brother. It can't be your mother. It can't be anybody else. It's got to be you. Otherwise, you can't go out in the world. And that got me to a point where, as a writer, I started to have a kind of belief in myself. And like maybe some moments where it's like, ooh, am I supposed to do this? It's like, does it feel right to you? If the answer is yes, then you do it. This doesn't mean you don't have teachers and mentors, but nothing's going to work if you can't be your own judge of the material, whether it's a song, whether it's a book, whether it's a sentence, whether it's a class, whether it's a contribution to a film. Like anybody who's out there working and is working for a period of years, I would feel sure that I could say they have the capacity to be their own judge. So Memory Girls gave me that. It like, did I use it responsibly? Not for a little bit, but some part of me that was broken got repaired. And then I would, and then really I became an academic. I left music and some important stuff happened in the world of, you know, well, now I'm gonna get my chronology wrong because Memory Girls comes after, like I've been in school for a long time. But I don't want to leave that part out of it because major repair work was done in classrooms. And then major repair work was done making Memory Girls. And then major repair work was done being a teacher and major repair work was done getting clean and sober. And so, like all these kind of constituent parts come together to, help create like a guy who can like operate in the world a little better.
I want to get to your writing projects, but I don't want to just ignore that your music really evolved on people that I'm wrong for. And the biggest bankruptcy in the world was the record, I believe, that had I'll Never Forget That Day with You.
Yeah.
Bankruptcy. Yeah, that was just a great song. And I went back and listened to some of this stuff. You are a great songwriter. And you have a lot of 2 minute songs, less than 3 minutes. I love that. I don't like these really long, just get it all done like you're supposed to. And you do that. You get it all done in a,
Well, I mean, there's now I'm gonna burden you with a cliche, but there's a lot to be learned from the Beatles.
there you go.
We all know it, but we should keep knowing it, and we should try to know it even better. But sometimes there are these like damn near 2 minute Beatles songs that feel so complete. Like if you played it for a man on the street and said, "How long was that song?" They'd say, "I don't know, 3.5 minutes." Like it was 2 minutes. Like you can get the job done. If the job's done, get the fuck out of
Yeah, I
there.
mean, I think I just told you my favorite song that you wrote was 2 minutes and 6 seconds long or something like that. I mean, that's basically it. Um,
Yeah.
You've written a lot of books, and I'd love to talk to every one of these with you, but I'm just going to pick a certain thing out here. Um, you mentioned that Tom Petty was inspired by your uh, Dusty in Memphis book, even writing the
Yeah.
song Down South. I don't know, I read that somewhere. What was it
Yep.
like to hear from him, and what was your relationship with Tom? Because you ended up writing Petty, the biography, which is a very great book that a lot of people love. Talk about Tom for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. So, gosh, there are a lot of Boston threads here because of Joe Pernice. Um, I got hooked up with the 33 and a third series of books.
Love those.
Yeah, so Joyce Lenahan, Joe's manager, and my manager, David Newgarden, were talking, and they were like, "Oh, these two guys should meet." And so they set up this blind date. I had a book deal the next day, so Joe made
Fantastic.
that happen. And so then you go and you pick what's your book? And I picked the Kinks Village Green Preservation Society. And that was in place. And then the editor came to me and said, "You know what? A writer I really want in this series will only do it if he can do Village Green." And I said, "No problem. I have other records that are in this category of the most meaningful." I said, "How about?" I gave him two. I said, "Dusty in Memphis or Randy Newman's Good Old Boys."
Hmm.
And he said, "Dusty in Memphis." And so I wrote about that. And it was I was on tour opening for the Wallflowers when I knew that deadline was coming. And I had it, this is how green I was. I had it in my head that 100,000 words were due. It's actually 25,000. I was like waking up at 3 a.m. going, how the fuck am I going to write 100,000 words? And then I finally went back and looked at the contract and I'm like, oh, I'm three-quarters done. That's like how I kind of thought nothing had been written. Uh, but I had written my dissertation, I'd gotten my PhD, and I really, and I credit my ex-brother-in-law with describing it this way, but he said, "Your Dusty in Memphis book's like a remix of your dissertation." And I was like, wow, he's totally right. You would never, that's not how you sell a book. It's like, oh, it's related to my dissertation. That like ensures that people won't read it. Uh, but it really was. I got to go into this totally free space, write that book. Somehow a copy when it comes out, it got to a few key people. Obviously Jerry Wexler, who was baked into the book, Diana Ross, and then Petty's management reached out and said, "Tom read your book and really liked it and would like to have dinner with you." Now, we toured with him back in the 80s. I had had no contact with him for what, a decade.
Yeah, he was a
And
Del Fuegos fan, wasn't he?
he was really kind to us, took us out on tour, sang on our third record. Really like we loved that guy. Yeah. And here he was, I'm an academic. I'm like, I'm not expecting any of this. So I go see him, and that just started this relationship. But we sat down, he said, I read your book twice. And because of it, I wrote this one song. And after dinner, I want you to come back to the house and hear it. And my
Wow.
mind was just blown. Then he went on to, like talked with Terry Gross saying, yeah, there's this guy, Warren Zanes. He wrote this book and was like, what is happening? And that relationship had, this second life to it. And, uh, Tom Petty opened some big doors for me,
Oh yeah.
you know, really kind to me, um, unbelievably forthcoming with me in collaborating on that book. And, you remove him from the story, there's no book like that. Like he really gave himself. That's my dog groaning. You can see his tail in the corner.
I don't know where my cat is. He hasn't made an appearance yet. He's goofing around in the other room.
You
Um,
can't escape the animals. But yes, like always a big moment for Tom Petty in this story. He helped me, that he believed in my voice, helped me to believe in my voice.
that's fantastic. I know that you were involved in George Harrison living in the material world. You've been involved with like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Johnny Cash. Um, Looking back at your time in the music industry, and what's been the most unexpected and rewarding part of this whole journey? Is it the writing of the books? Because I'm going to get to Springsteen in a second, but would you say
I,
that made you more
I,
comfortable than your music career?
I could pick I could pick a bunch of different things. Really hard question to answer, and I think one format for biography that is interesting to me is if you think of it as the education of blank, whoever the subject is. And, the becoming of anybody in any field. Like if I'm talking to someone and I want to do an interview with them, that format, so what is the education? What is your education? How did you come into being? Like, and give them a way to do it. Like, tell me the five key figures in you finding your voice in whatever it is you do. And then they'll start to kind of map it out. So I couldn't pick one moment because there were so many. Like I didn't mention my undergraduate advisor, a guy named John Bigonnet. And that's squarely out in the academic world. But that guy gave me a lot of his time. Story would be different without him. Story would be different without Tom Petty. The story would be different without, more recently, Bruce Springsteen. The story would be different without my brother asking me to join his band. The story would be different without a Lily Dennison in there. It's like you start to look and it's like, I can't pick a moment because there were so many
I get that.
constituent parts in the becoming. And uh, you want to like you don't want to get into some saccharine vision of this, like I would be nothing without them. I would still be something. There's a lot of good fortune in my story, though, and I want to acknowledge it while also saying I'm part of it. I did a lot to build myself. Uh, I did a lot to destroy myself. Um, and maybe it's the unexpected people who enter who are the ones who help with the parts that I destroyed, you know. So it was a collective project like any life, like any creative life. There's a collective behind that person. who helped make it possible. So I can't identify a moment, but I think we've talked about a bunch of them.
I think your story's even getting bigger as time goes on. You did this book, Deliver Me from Nowhere, it dives into the making of Springsteen's Nebraska. Um, Two things here. Why do you think that Nebraska is such a pivotal part in Springsteen's career? I think that I read somewhere that you thought it was one of the most important left turns. That's what I read. You said in a quote that it was the greatest left turn in American pop music. That's what you said about
Yeah. Yeah,
Nebraska.
and I stand by that. I stand by that.
So
Uh,
go ahead.
yeah, no, I just think it's incredibly interesting to me when someone gets lost. Um, when an artist gets lost and makes something of it, that's really interesting to me. In there's that really famous line uh, from Dante. In the middle of my life, I found myself lost in a wood. And I feel like that tells us that the midlife crisis is nothing new. You know, it goes back hundreds of years. Um, but it also tells us that that point in midlife, that being lost in the wood, can be the kind of forge on which something remarkable is built. But it's built in a place of, call it what you will, lostness, of brokenness, of, not understanding what comes next. And Springsteen did so much of this uh, publicly by releasing Nebraska. He had this trajectory going that was one of the most beautiful builds in American music. Greetings from Asbury Park, The Wild, the Innocent, the E Street Shuffle, Born to Run, Darkness on the Edge of Town, The River. Like there was a build. You got to see him finding out who he was and writing and making records and performing at the very highest level. So, if you were following him, man, he was in your life. And then he makes this record that's confusing. Rather than respond to The River as his first number one album, as the first album containing a hit single that he had with Hungry Heart, and then he makes Nebraska, like that always, first of all, as a fan, it disappointed me initially.
Wow.
I wanted him to go big. That was the feeling of where that trajectory was taking me. But I loved him so much by that time that I'd go anywhere he went. But I'm not going to lie and say I wasn't confused. I was confused. I was disappointed, but I put the time into Nebraska because I believed in him. And in putting the time in, I came to believe in Nebraska. But I still look back and went, why in God's name would any artist do that when they were positioned for superstardom? I would never do it. I'd never miss that opportunity. It just hasn't come my way. But I felt that when I read his memoir, I felt like I still didn't have an answer for why he did that. And that was the seedbed of writing this book. Like it was almost on some level like detective work. Why did this artist do that right then when he had possibilities that would allure anyone, you know?
So I guess you're not really that surprised that people like Scott Cooper and Jeremy Allen White were drawn to this story, and now they've gone on to make a film about it. Did that surprise you at all when you got that call?
Well, yes, I mean, anything like that surprises you, but when you sit and look at it more like intellectually, I'm overwhelmed that it's happening. But intellectually, these are, you mentioned Jeremy Allen White, you mentioned Scott Cooper. these are artists.
Yeah.
Anybody who's working in the arts has known being lost, between projects, before projects. We all know it. So the story of an artist doing what Bruce did, in a way, he took some risks. The phoenix rises from the ashes. His risk was he
Yeah.
went into the ashes, because you're taking a chance. Not everybody is going to be a phoenix rising from the ashes. Sometimes you go into the ashes and it's your burial ground. So that's the risk. He went in and he made Nebraska, which was involved him going into some very hard parts of his own past. Commercially, it was releasing something that made no sense commercially, couldn't be played on the radio, you know, and a phoenix did rise from those ashes. Uh, but he took that chance. So other artists, I think, look at it and go, maybe I should take that chance in my own work. Maybe I should try to set aside all the demands of the marketplace, all the expectations that are on my shoulders, and do the thing I feel I have to do, even if it doesn't make sense. And let's see what happens. That's a really, Richard Thompson's, his word to describe it was brave. And I think that's a good word. A lot of people were sitting and watching Bruce do this and going, holy shit. And so that a movie came of it on some level makes good sense. That my book is a part of that is, I'm incredibly proud. I'm moved by it. I'm also still surprised.
I'm looking forward to, I have a friend, as you know, that's working on the film. Otherwise, we would be
Yeah,
talking to each other right
yeah,
now.
yeah. A
Thanks,
great
Ted.
guy.
Thank you, Ted. But thank you for all of this. I'm just going to ask you a one final question here. You've played a big part in bridging the worlds of music and writing and academia. What do you hope your legacy is going to be? Is this too big of a question? Like, is it music? Is it the cultural landscape? I mean, how do you feel about everything? What do you think you want to do next?
Uh, well, what I'm doing next, I'm already doing. And as is typical, you can't talk about a lot of that. So I feel really fortunate. I put in a lot of work, but there are a lot of people who put in a lot of work and don't get the opportunities that I've got. So I feel fortunate. But uh, if you know the writer Bill Flanagan, he's like a
Oh,
good
yeah.
friend. And I was talking about some project, and I said, it's not my magnum opus, saying like I'm doing this project, but it's not my big one. And he looked at me and said, of course it's not your big one. The big one is our kids. And I'm like, 100%, man. I got two boys, Lucian and Piero, and that's my legacy. And part of being a dad is it's amazing to get to have them uh, see me enjoy some of my good fortune and my work. Like they know I work, and they know that I love them, and that's not what I come from. You know. And I feel fortunate that being a father came pretty naturally. I did it imperfectly, but loving them came pretty naturally to me. And I don't think it does to everybody. And that's not a judgment of them. You know, on paper, I look like somebody who it might not have come naturally to. You know, I didn't know my father on any real level. And he lived 20 minutes from me at one point, and I didn't see him. Uh, that I came out of that and have a connection with my kids. Uh, that's the magnum opus for sure. So, that the legacy's mixed in with that because, everything else, like it'll get buried over time. And, uh, what you do in loving another person, and that can be in your writing and in your music. That's probably the legacy, but it's gonna fade from view and become something else. I really do believe in that kind of compost theory of it all. Like it's all gonna go into that compost heap and then something grows from it, but your name doesn't get to be attached to what grows from the compost heap. So it's like you better keep your humility about you because that's the way it goes.
Warren, you got a great story, man. And thank you so much for talking to
Yeah.
us. And I love your story, and I know it's going to get even better. So
Yeah,
thanks.
thank you.
All
Yeah,
right.
thank you.